Good to have you join me on Global News and Zuma Nigeria on Ukraine-Russian war. Ukraine accuses Moscow of killing unarmed prisoners. ICJ to hear Israel-Palestine dispute. Vaccines release raises political future queries. No less than 64 killed in biggest tribal clashes in PNG. And China boosts patrols near Taiwan after death of fishermen. Stay with me for these more stories. On Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine has opened a probe into allegations that Russian forces executed 8 unarmed Ukrainian soldiers after they took control of the city of Avdiivka. According to reports on Monday, the security services of Ukraine, under the guidance of the Donetsk Regional Prosecutor's Office, launched a pretrial investigation into the supposed murder of unarmed prisoners of war in Avdiivka and the village of Vesely. Report quoting security agency in a statement said under the procedural supervision of the Donetsk Regional Prosecutor's Office, a pretrial probe has been initiated into the violation of the laws and customs of war combined with premeditated murder, Part 2 of Article 438 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. Reports said evidence of the killings were shared on social media, including footage showing a Russian soldier shooting 2 captured Ukrainian soldiers at close range. Moscow has not publicly responded to the claims. Ukraine has continually accused Russia of illicit killings and other war crimes since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion of its neighbor in February 2022. Russia has also accused Ukraine of committing violations of international law. On Saturday, Russia announced that it had taken full control of Avdiivka after the extraction of Ukrainian forces in the largest gain for Moscow since the fall of Bakhmut last May. Russian President Vladimir Putin hailed the capture of the city as a significant victory in the nearly 2-year-long war. On Sunday, Ukraine's military said Russian forces launched several attacks to the west of Avdiivka to build on their territorial gains, including failed assaults on the village of Lastonkine. Ukrainian military spokesman Dmytro Lyakhiv said the enemy is trying to actively develop its offensive. Ukrainian forces' withdrawal from Avdiivka came after they were forced to share ammunition due to decreasing supplies, which the administration of United States President Joe Biden has blamed on Congress's failure to swiftly approve a package of military aid for Kyiv. On Israel-Gaza crisis, the United Nations highest court is prepared to open historic hearings into the legitimacy of Israel's 57-year occupation of the Palestinian territories. The week-long proceedings, which started at the International Court of Justice ICJ in The Hague on Monday, come as Israel continues its distressing war on Gaza. The assault has killed over 29,000 Palestinians since October 7th. The case is separate from the genocide complaint South Africa filed at the ICJ against Israel for its alleged violations on the ongoing war. It centers instead on Israel's occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem since 1967. The Palestinians seek all 3 areas for independent states. Palestinian representatives who speak first on Monday will argue that the Israeli occupation is unlawful because it has violated 3 crucial views of international law, the Palestinian legal team said according to reports on Wednesday. They say Israel has violated the prohibition of territorial conquest by annexing large swaths of occupied land, violated Palestinians' right to self-determination, and enforced a system of racial discrimination and apartheid. Omar Awadallah, the head of the United Nations Organization's department in the Palestinian Foreign Ministry, said, "We want to hear new words from the courts. They've had to consider the word genocide in the South African case," he said, referring to the separate case before the courts. "Now we want to consider apartheid." Awadallah said that an advisory opinion from the court will give us many tools using peaceful international law methods and tools to confront the illegalities of the occupation. The court will possibly take months to make a ruling. An unprecedented 51 countries and 3 organizations, the League of Arab States, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the African Union, will address the judges in the wood panel Great Hall of Justice after the Palestinians present their arguments. Israel will not present an oral argument, although it has sent written observations. The case arrived at the court after the United Nations General Assembly UNGA voted by a wide margin in December 2022 to ask the 15-judge panel for a non-binding advisory opinion on the Israeli occupation. The request was endorsed by Palestinians and opposed strongly by Israel, which said any potential decision from the courts will be completely illegitimate. Israel seized the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza in 1967 during a war with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005 but still controls the enclave's borders. Away from wars, now on politics, Thailand's imprisoned ex-Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra has been released on parole after being detained for 6 months at a police hospital over corruption-connected offences. Thaksin's release, the peak of a period of reconciliation between his populist movement and the country's conservative formation, raises questions about what role the former telecoms tycoon might play in Thai politics moving forward. Thaksin, a soaring but divisive presence in Thai politics whose populist policies appeal to rural dwellers who felt abandoned by the country's ruling elites, led Thailand between 2001 and 2006 when his government was ousted in a military coup. Even after fleeing the country in 2008 to avoid punishment for abuse of power and other offences while in office, Thaksin, 74, employed an impending presence over politics in Thailand. From 2011 and 2014, Thaksin's sister Yingluck Shinawatra served as Thailand's first female prime minister under the banner of the Pheu Thai Party, which was born out of the remnants of Thaksin's Thai Rak Thai. Thaksin's return to Thailand in August, following closely 16 years of self-imposed exile, coincided with the Pheu Thai Party's return to power after it created a coalition government with the pro-military Palang Pracharath Party and United Thai Nation, led by Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin. The Move Forward Party, the winners of elections in May, were blocked by the military-appointed Senate from creating a government amidst an establishment backlash to plan reforms to the military and the monarchy, including a promise to adjust Thailand's controversial Les Majestic law. The timing of Thaksin's return and his receipt of a royal pardon, which abridged his 8-year sentence to 1 year, has led to a rumor that a secret deal was made to let him come home on favorable terms. In a statement on Sunday, the leader of the opposition in Parliament, Move Forward, said the circumstances of Thaksin's release raise questions about whether there are double standards in the justice system. The Pheu Thai Party, which is led by Thaksin's daughter, Paetongtarn, has denied striking a deal to win the former Prime Minister leniency. According to reports, at least 64 people have been killed in tribal violence in the northern highlands of Papua New Guinea (PNG), with one police officer describing the killings as the largest in the Pacific nation's recent history. According to reports citing local police, said the killings started at dawn on Sunday in the Wapenamanda district of the Enga province. They involved the Amboline and Sikin tribes as well as their allies, it said. Police said, according to reports, that they recovered some 64 bodies from the roadside grasslands and hills of Wapenamanda by Monday morning. Rival factions used high-powered guns such as AK-47 and M4 rifles in the battles, report said. The death toll is anticipated to rise, it added. Reports said the violence involved the same tribes that were responsible for clashes that killed 60 in Enga province last year. George Karkas, a senior officer in the country's police force, said, "This is by far the largest killing I've seen in Enga, maybe in all of Highlands as well as in Papua New Guinea, PNG." The agency said the military has set out around 100 troops to the area, but that their impact has been limited, with the security services remaining outnumbered and outgunned. In the capital, Port Moresby, opponents of Prime Minister James Marrow's government called for immediate action, including the deployment of additional troops to the area. Anthony Albanese, Australian Prime Minister, also expressed concern That is very disturbing, the news that has come out of Papua New Guinea, he said, according to a report on Monday. Moving ahead, China is adding patrols in waters close to a group of frontline islands controlled by Taiwan as tensions grow after 2 Chinese fishermen drowned during a pursuit by Taiwan's Coast Guard, who accused them of trespassing. On Sunday, China's Coast Guard said its Fujian division will boost maritime law enforcement and carry out regular patrols in waters around the Chinese city of Xiamen and Taiwan's Kinmen Islands, which lie just miles apart. The move is targeted at further maintaining the order of operations in the important waters and protecting the lives and property of fishermen, Gan Yu, a spokesperson for China's Coast Guard, said. In a statement, the patrols are expected to put Chinese Coast Guard vessels in closer proximity to their Taiwanese counterparts, potentially raising the risk of miscalculation and conflict. The increase came days after a Chinese speedboat capsized while trying to flee for Taiwan's Coast Guard, which said it had trespassed to fish in waters about 1 nautical mile off Kingsman's coast. 4 crew members fell into the water. 2 survived after being rescued by Taiwan's Coast Guard, while the other 2 were found unconscious and confirmed dead after being taken to the hospital in Kinmen. Beijing has issued strongly worded condemnations and blamed Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party (DPP) for the deaths, claiming it had used various excuses to forcefully seize mainland fishing boats and treat mainland fishermen roughly and dangerously. China's Taiwan Affairs Office said on Thursday such a vicious incident seriously hurt the feelings of compatriots on both sides of the Taiwan Strait during the Lunar New Year holiday, a time for family reunions celebrated in both mainland China and Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party regards Taiwan, a self-governing democracy, as part of its territory despite never having controlled it, and Chinese vessels are frequently active in the waters near Kinmen due to its geographical proximity to mainland China. On Thursday, Taiwan authorities voiced regrets over the deaths, but maintained that its Coast Guard officers were acting on their mandates in accordance with the law. On Saturday, China's Taiwan Affairs Office ramped up the rhetoric, saying the deaths had caused strong indignation in mainland China while denying Taiwan's designation of restricted waters near Kinmen. Now on more stories on Israel-Gaza war. Israel to call Brazilian envoy over Lula's Gaza remarks. On Sunday, Israel said it's subpoenaing the Brazilian ambassador to the country over what it says were shameful and serious remarks by Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva about the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. Speaking earlier on Sunday in Addis Ababa at the African Union Summit, Lula called what is happening in Gaza Strip a genocide. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on X that Lula was trivializing the Holocaust and trying to harm the Jewish people and Israel's right to defend itself, saying that comparing Israel to the Nazi Holocaust and Hitler is crossing a red line. Israel fights for its defense and securing its future until complete victory, and it does so while upholding international law, he added. Israel has said its aim is to totally eliminate Hamas after the attack on Israel on October 7th. Israel Katz, Israeli foreign minister, also posted on X saying, "No one will harm Israel's right to defend itself. I have ordered the people of my office to summon the Brazilian ambassador for a reprimand call tomorrow." Lula also made comments about the death of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. He called for a proper probe into the cause of his death while speaking at the summit. While many Western nations immediately condemned Russian President Vladimir Putin, Lula said, according to reports, "I understand the interest of the person making the accusation immediately, but it is not my style. I hope that a coroner will provide an explanation for why the individual died. That's all." Now coming to African scenes, Senegal protests election day postponement. Senegalese took to the street to demonstrate against the potential extension of President Macky Sall's term beyond April 2nd, the date set aside by the Constitution for the transfer of power. carrying flags and banners emblazoned with messages such as election by force and terminus April 2nd. Demonstrators voiced their strong opposition to any attempt to prolong Seoul's presidency. Organized by a citizen platform, the protest gathered widespread backing from individuals across various segments of the society. The protest, characterized by its peaceful nature, marked a notable departure from former occasions of civil unrest in the country. While originally planned as a silent march, the protest progressed into a spirited expression of demands, particularly from supporters of opposition figure Usman Sonko, who called for his release. Central to the protesters' demands was the speedy holding of presidential elections in accordance with the constitutional timeline. The protest coincided with the Constitutional Council's rejection of a law proposing the postponement of the presidential election, a decision hailed by the demonstrators. This rejection indicated a victory for those advocating for adherence to constitutional mandates and reinforced the importance of public mobilization in shaping political outcomes. African leaders denounced Gaza offensive. On Saturday, leaders at an African Union summit in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa on Saturday condemned Israel's offensive in Gaza and called for its instant end. The chair of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, said Israel's offensive was the most flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and accused Israel of having exterminated Gaza's inhabitants. Faki spoke alongside Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, who also addressed the summit. President of the Comoros and the outgoing chairperson of the African Union, Azali Assoumani, pressed the case brought by the South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice (ICJ), while condemning the genocide Israel is committing in Palestine under our nose. A quarter of Gaza's residents are starving because of the war, which began with Hamas's assault into Israel on October 7th, in which militants killed about 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and abducted around 250. Israel strongly refutes committing genocide in Gaza and says it does all it can to spare civilians and is only targeting Hamas militants. It says Hamas's tactic of embedding in civilian areas makes it difficult to avoid civilian casualties. During last year's AU summit, an Israeli delegate was abruptly removed from the plenary hall amidst a row over the country's observer status at the Continental Verdi. Concern over flood conflicts and the resurgence of coups across the African continent also underscored the opening of this year's summit. Faki cited tensions over Senegal's postponed election and violence in eastern Congo, Sudan, the Sahel, and Libya. He called for a revival of the spirit of African solidarity and Pan-Africanism to overcome the many challenges facing the continent of 1.3 billion people. In part 2, I'll bring you stories from Nigeria. Do stay with us. You're welcome back. Now, stories from Nigeria says presidency Atiku clash on FG's forex policy. Yesterday, the presidency and ex-vice president Atiku Abubakar were locked in a war of words over the economic reforms of the federal government, especially forex. While speaking at the meeting, Atiku said President Bola Tinubu's economic policies, mainly the unification of the exchange rates, were hurriedly implemented without sufficient planning and consultations with stakeholders. The presidency accused him of spewing lies on President Tinubu's administration. Atiku recalled that in his 2023 presidential election policy document, My Covenant with Nigerians, he promised to reform the foreign exchange market by eradicating numerous exchange rate windows, which only benefited opportunists, middlemen, and fraudsters. He added, and I quote, "A fixed exchange rate system will be out of the question. First, it will not be in line with our philosophy of running an open, private sector-friendly economy. Secondly, operating a successful fixed exchange rate system will require sufficient FX reserves to defend the domestic currency at all times. But as is well known, Nigeria's major challenge is the persistent FX illiquidity occasioned by limited foreign exchange inflows to the country. He explained that the regulation was vital because Nigeria has insufficient, unstable, and precarious foreign reserves to support a free-floating rate regime. Nigeria's reserves did not have enough foreign exchange that can be sold freely at fair market prices during crisis. But responding to Atiku's statement last night, the presidency, in a statement titled, "Once again, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar got it wrong," signed by Bayo Onanuga, said, and I quote, "Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, in an attempt to rubbish the foreign exchange policy of the Tinubu administration, got his facts muddled up again." According to the statement, the decisions at the meeting reflected the major points discussed. Forest rangers are to be strengthened and armed, while police are to recruit more men, and the National Economic Council to deepen discussions about creating state police. It further stated that President Tinubu affirmed his approval for the release of 42,000 metric tons of gains from the National Reserve. And finally, on the news, Tinubu Lula seeks stronger ties, direct flights. In Addis Ababa, Ethiopia on Sunday, President Bola Tinubu met with his Brazilian counterpart, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and had fruitful deliberations on comprehensive boosting of bilateral relations in all fields, the presidency has said. A statement by Tinubu's media aide, Ajuri Ngalale, noted that the Nigerian leader at the meeting stressed the strength of Nigeria's economic potential and influence, saying the country is witnessing a leap forward despite some short-term reform pains as his administration is removing all encumbrances to business. The president further enlightened that his administration is investing in key sectors of the economy like healthcare, education, and agriculture to ensure the welfare of all Nigerian citizens to create sustainable economic prosperity for future generations. Evaluating Nigeria's natural and human resource wealth akin to Brazil's president, Lula da Silva said Africa's largest economy and South America's largest economy have a long and interesting history together. The Brazilian leader said Nigeria and Brazil once had a trade volume of more than $10 billion in the past, which has now plummeted to $1.6 billion, emphasizing that he is determined to strengthen bilateral relations. President Tinubu, responding, said Nigeria is prepared to deepen ties with Brazil, noting that it is a legacy of what can be done together to change the future for countless millions of our citizens. While identifying solid mineral exploration, agriculture, education, and healthcare as areas of immediate concern, President Tinubu emphasized that the will of the two leaders to collaborate is firmly created. The leaders of the largest democracies in Africa and South America respectively agreed to work out the modalities for a state visit to Brazil by President Tinubu after President Lula da Silva extended an invitation which the Nigerian leader warmly accepted. Another look at the top stories. Ukraine accuses Moscow of killing unarmed prisoners. ICJ to hear Israel-Palestine dispute. Vaccines release raises political future queries. No less than 64 killed in biggest tribal clashes in Papua New Guinea. And China boosts patrols near Taiwan after death of fishermen. And that's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and a nice week ahead.